Pain doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't knock on the door and wait for an answer. It arrives unannounced, in the middle of an ordinary day, and changes everything. One moment you're walking through your life with plans and purposes, and the next moment the ground beneath you gives way, and you're left standing in the wreckage, asking a question that has no easy answer. Why does it hurt this much? Why does suffering exist at all? 700 years before Christ walked the earth, a prophet named Isaiah saw something that would change how we understand suffering forever. He saw a figure, a man unlike any other, who would carry pain that wasn't his own, who would be despised and rejected by the very people he came to save. This is Isaiah 53, the vision of the suffering servant, and it reveals the most counterintuitive truth in human history, that innocent suffering can heal guilty souls. There's a particular kind of suffering that haunts us more than any other. It's not the pain that comes from our own mistakes, though that's hard enough to bear. It's the suffering that seems to have no reason, the kind that falls on people who don't deserve it, the child who gets sick, the honest person who loses everything, the gentle soul who gets crushed by a world that rewards cruelty. This is the suffering that makes us question everything we thought we knew about justice, about goodness, about whether any of this means anything at all. Imagine walking through a city at dusk. The streets are filled with people, returning home from work, their faces tired but peaceful, carrying the small burdens of ordinary life. You pass by homes where families gather around tables, where laughter echoes through open windows, where everything seems right with the world. But you know, as anyone who has truly lived knows, that behind some of those closed doors, there is grief so deep it has no words. There is pain so private it can't be shared. There is suffering so profound it changes the shape of a human soul. And you wonder, as you walk those streets, why the world is built this way. Why pain is woven into the fabric of existence like a thread you can't pull out without unraveling everything. Why some people seem to carry more than their share while others glide through life untouched. Why the innocent suffer while the guilty prosper. Why goodness doesn't protect you. Why love doesn't shield you. Why being right doesn't save you. These aren't new questions. They're as old as humanity itself. Thousands of years ago, in a different city under different stars, people asked the same things. They watched the righteous fall and wondered what it meant. They saw the faithful crushed and questioned whether faith had any value at all. They lived in a world where power seemed to be the only truth that mattered, where might made right, where the strong devoured the weak and called it natural order. And then Isaiah saw something. Standing at the edge of history, looking into a future he couldn't fully understand, he caught a glimpse of a figure that would redefine everything. Not a king riding in triumph, not a warrior leading armies, not a ruler dispensing justice from a throne. Something else entirely. A man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. A person who would take the most human of all experiences, the experience of pain, and transform it into something that could heal. But the vision doesn't begin with answers. It begins with shock, with confusion, with the jarring sight of something that shouldn't be possible. Picture this. You're standing in a crowd watching someone walk through the streets. But this isn't a celebration. This isn't a parade. This is something darker. This person, this suffering one, is marked by pain in ways you can barely comprehend. Their appearance is so marred, so disfigured by what they've endured, that people turn away. We hid our faces from him. Not because they're cruel, but because it's too much to look at, because suffering this deep disturbs something in us. It reminds us of our own fragility. It shows us what we could become, what we fear we might already be. And the natural response, the human response, is to create distance, to tell ourselves that this person must have done something to deserve this. That there must be a reason, that God is punishing them for some hidden sin, some secret crime. We considered him stricken by God, smitten by him, and afflicted. Because if their suffering is random, if it's meaningless, then ours could be too. And that thought is unbearable. So we hide our faces, we turn away. We make up stories about why they deserve this. We convince ourselves that the world is fair, that pain is always proportional to guilt, that if we're good enough, we'll be safe. It's a lie we tell ourselves to sleep at night. A story we craft to keep the darkness at bay. But what if we're wrong? What if the person suffering isn't guilty at all? What if they're actually innocent? What if they're not being punished for their own sins, but carrying something that belongs to someone else? This is where the story takes a turn that changes everything. This is where the vision becomes almost too strange to believe. Isaiah sees it clearly, even though it makes no sense. This rejected righteous one, this figure despised and avoided by others, isn't bearing their own guilt. They're bearing ours. He was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Every wound on their body is a wound that should have been on someone else. Every stripe, every bruise, Every moment of agony is absorbing pain that was meant for another. This innocent man is being crushed, but not for their own wrongdoing. They're being crushed for ours. Think about what that means for a moment. Really think about it. You've done things you're not proud of. You've hurt people. You've failed. You've been selfish, cruel, indifferent. You've turned away when you should have helped. You've spoken when you should have been silent. You've been silent when you should have spoken. You carry guilt that sits in your chest like a stone. Shame that colors everything you see. Regret that wakes you up at 3 in the morning and won't let you go back to sleep. And all of that, all of the weight of your failures, your betrayals, your darkness is being lifted off your shoulders and placed on someone else. Someone who didn't earn it, someone who doesn't deserve it, someone who chooses to take it anyway. This is the heart of the mystery. This is the core of Isaiah's prophecy, that suffering can be transferred, that pain can be taken on voluntarily, that someone can stand in the gap between guilt and consequence and absorb the blow meant for another. It's the most counterintuitive idea in human history. It goes against everything we understand about justice, about fairness, about how the universe works. Justice says you pay for what you do. The scales must balance. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. You reap what you sow. But here, in this vision, someone else is reaping what you sowed. Someone else is paying what you owe. Someone else is standing where you should be standing, taking what you should be taking, suffering what you should be suffering. And they're doing it in silence. That's the other strange part of this story. The wounded one doesn't fight back, doesn't argue, doesn't defend themselves, doesn't cry out for mercy or justice or fairness. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. Like a lamb led to the slaughter, like a sheep before its shearers is silent. So he did not open his mouth. They endure it all without protest, without complaint, without demanding that someone explain why this is happening. Think about how unnatural that is. When we suffer, we want everyone to know. We want sympathy. We want validation. We want someone to acknowledge our pain, to tell us it's not fair, to stand with us in our outrage. We want justice. We want revenge. We want the people who hurt us to hurt like we hurt. We want the scales to balance. But the suffering one wants none of that. They absorb it all. Take it in. Let it stop with them. Break the cycle of pain, creating more pain, of hurt demanding more hurt, of suffering multiplying itself endlessly through generations. They become a place where the violence stops, where the anger dies, where the debt is canceled, where the chain is broken. And here's what makes it even stranger. This silence, this acceptance, this willingness to suffer without retaliation, it's not weakness, it's not passivity, it's not defeat, it's the most powerful act imaginable. Because it's the only thing that can actually heal. You can't heal wounds by inflicting more wounds. You can't stop suffering by creating more suffering. You can't break cycles of pain by perpetuating them. The only way to truly stop the spread of evil is to absorb it, to take it in and not pass it on, to let it end with you. And that requires a strength that most of us can't even imagine. The man of sorrows has that strength. They take the blows and don't return them. They absorb the hatred and don't reflect it. They carry the guilt and don't shift it to someone else. They become a lightning rod for all the darkness in the world, drawing it to themselves, letting it pour through them, and somehow, mysteriously, transforming it in the process. Because that's what happens when innocent suffering meets guilty souls. Something shifts. Something changes. The suffering doesn't become meaningless. It becomes redemptive. It doesn't destroy. It restores. It doesn't break. It heals. By his wounds we are healed. By his stripes we are made whole. By his death we find life. This is the most impossible mathematics in existence. Pain plus innocence equals healing. Suffering plus love equals redemption. Death plus sacrifice equals life. It makes no sense according to the logic of the world, but it's the only logic that's ever actually saved anyone. Let's bring this closer to home. Let's make it personal. You've been wounded by people who never apologized. You've been betrayed by people who never acknowledged what they did. You've been hurt by people who went on with their lives as if nothing happened. And that pain lives in you. It shapes how you see the world. It colors your relationships. It makes you defensive, guarded, afraid to trust, quick to assume the worst. And you have two choices. You can pass that pain on. You can hurt others the way you've been hurt. You can make them pay for what someone else did to you. You can create more victims, more wounded people, more carriers of unhealed pain. You can keep the cycle going. Or you can absorb it. You can let it stop with you. You can choose not to pass on what you received. You can decide that the chain of hurt ends here, in your life, in your choices, in your refusal to make someone else carry what you've been carrying. You can become, in your own small way, what the suffering one was in the ultimate way, a place where suffering dies instead of multiplies. But here's the truth that most of us discover. We don't have the strength to do that on our own. We want to, we try to, but the weight is too much. The pain is too deep. The wounds are too many. We need someone stronger than us to bear what we can't bear. We need someone to step into our story and carry what we can't carry. And that's exactly what the prophecy promises. Someone who can bear it, someone who will bear it, someone who already has borne it, is bearing it, will always bear it. Someone whose shoulders are broad enough for the guilt of the world, whose heart is deep enough for the sorrow of humanity, whose love is strong enough to absorb the hatred and not be diminished by it. Isaiah saw this person clearly, saw them suffering alone, despised and rejected by mankind, a man of sorrows, familiar with grief, saw them oppressed and afflicted, yet silent, saw them cut off from the land of the living, stricken for the transgression of the people, saw them assigned a grave with the wicked, though they had done no violence, nor was any deceit in their mouth. And here's where the story takes its most dramatic turn, because all of this suffering, all of this pain, all of this injustice, it wasn't the end. It was the means to the end. It was the path to something greater. It was the way through, not the place to stay. The rejected righteous one doesn't remain in the grave. The suffering doesn't have the final word. The pain doesn't win. After the anguish of their soul, they see light and are satisfied. They justify many because they bear their iniquities. They're given a portion with the great, not because they conquered through violence, but because they conquered through surrender. Not because they demanded justice, but because they absorbed injustice. Not because they lived without pain, but because they transformed pain into purpose. This is the pattern that changes everything, the template that redefines human existence, the model that shows us what strength really looks like, what power really means, what victory really requires. It's not about avoiding suffering, it's about suffering with purpose. It's not about escaping pain, it's about pain that produces something eternal. And once you see this pattern, you start seeing it everywhere. You see it in parents who sacrifice their own dreams so their children can have better lives. You see it in people who forgive when they have every right to hold grudges. You see it in those who choose love when hate would be easier. You see it in every act of mercy, every gesture of grace, every moment when someone takes on more than their share so others can carry less. You see it in the caregiver who stays up all night with a sick loved one, in the friend who absorbs your anger without taking it personally, in the teacher who invests in the difficult student everyone else has given up on, in the neighbor who keeps showing up even when nothing changes, in every person who has ever chosen to bear someone else's burden without being asked, without being thanked, without expecting anything in return. These small acts of redemptive suffering are echoes of something greater, reflections of a deeper truth, shadows of the one who suffered perfectly, completely, once and for all. They point to something beyond themselves. They testify to a reality that most of us sense but can't quite articulate, that suffering doesn't have to be meaningless, that pain can be redemptive, that what looks like defeat can actually be victory. But let's be honest about something. This is a hard truth to accept, because it means that some suffering is necessary. It means that the path to healing goes through the wound, not around it. It means that redemption is costly, that salvation requires sacrifice, that love, real love, the kind that actually transforms people, demands everything. We want easier answers. We want a God who prevents all suffering, who steps in before the pain starts, who rearranges the universe so nothing bad ever happens to anyone. We want protection without cost. We want healing without surgery. We want resurrection without crucifixion. But that's not how transformation works. You can't become a new person without the old person dying. You can't enter new life without leaving the old one behind. You can't be healed without confronting the wound. You can't be freed without acknowledging the chains. You can't be saved without admitting you're lost. And someone has to pay the cost of that transformation. Someone has to stand in the gap. Someone has to absorb the pain. Someone has to carry the weight. And Isaiah's prophecy tells us that someone did, that someone does, that someone will. This suffering one, this rejected figure, this despised stone that becomes the cornerstone, they're not just a historical person. They're not just a character in an ancient text. They're a living reality, a present help, a current refuge. They're suffering with you right now in your pain, in your darkness, in your despair. They're bearing what you can't bear. They're carrying what you can't carry. They're taking on themselves what would destroy you. And all they ask in return is that you let them, that you stop trying to carry it alone, that you stop pretending you're fine when you're breaking, that you stop hiding your wounds and presenting a perfect face to the world, that you acknowledge your need, your weakness, your inability to save yourself, that you turn to them and say, I can't do this on my own. I need someone stronger. I need you. This is the invitation woven into the prophecy. This is the offer hidden in the suffering. Come to me, the wounded one says, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Not because I'll make your problems disappear, not because I'll wave a magic wand and fix everything, but because I'll carry it with you. I'll bear what you can't bear. I'll transform your pain into purpose. I'll make your suffering redemptive. I'll turn your wounds into wisdom and your scars into stories that heal others. Think about the people in your life who have the most to offer, the ones whose words carry weight, the ones whose presence brings peace, the ones who seem to understand pain in a way that those who've never suffered can't. Almost always, they're people who've been through something, who've walked through fire and come out the other side, who've suffered and somehow let that suffering shape them into something beautiful instead of something bitter. They're living proof that the prophecy is true, that wounds can heal others, that suffering can be redemptive, that pain, when met with love and faith and courage, can become the very thing that saves you and everyone you touch. But here's what you need to understand. You can't manufacture this on your own. You can't just decide to make your suffering meaningful and have it magically transform. You need help. You need someone who has walked this path before, someone who has taken suffering and turned it into salvation, someone who knows the way through the darkness because they've been there and emerged into the light. The man of sorrows knows the way. They've walked the path of suffering all the way to the end and out the other side. They've descended into the depths and risen again. They've been through death and come back with the keys. They've faced everything you're facing and worse, and they've won. Not by avoiding it, not by denying it, not by pretending it doesn't hurt, but by going straight through it with love as their only weapon and sacrifice as their only strategy. And now they're reaching back into your darkness and saying, follow me, take my hand, walk this path with me. Let me show you how suffering can be transformed, how pain can have purpose, how the worst thing that ever happened to you can become the best thing you ever had to offer someone else. This is the mystery at the heart of Isaiah's vision. This is the secret hidden in plain sight, that God doesn't waste suffering, that nothing you go through is meaningless if you let it shape you instead of destroy you, that the one who was pierced for our transgressions and crushed for our iniquities can take every piercing you've experienced, every crushing weight you've carried, and somehow weave it into a story of redemption. But you have to give it to them. You have to release it. You have to stop clinging to your pain like it's all you have. You have to stop defining yourself by your wounds. You have to stop letting your past suffering determine your future. You have to let the suffering one take it from you, bear it, transform it, and give you back something new. This is what it means to be healed by their wounds. Not that your suffering disappears, not that your scars vanish, but that they become something different, something redemptive, something that connects you to others who suffer, something that makes you capable of compassion you never had before, something that deepens your soul and expands your heart and makes you more human, not less. The wounds of the innocent man are the proof that suffering can be survived, that pain can be endured, that you can go through hell and come out the other side. But more than that, they're the power that makes your survival possible, because the suffering one didn't just survive their suffering, they conquered it, they stripped it of its ultimate power, they robbed it of its ability to destroy, they turned it into the very instrument of salvation. And now that same power is available to you. The same strength that carried the rejected righteous through their darkest hour can carry you through yours. The same love that sustained them when everyone else abandoned them can sustain you when you feel alone. The same hope that brought them through death into life can bring you through whatever death you're facing into whatever new life is waiting on the other side. This is not empty comfort. This is not wishful thinking. This is the testimony of millions of people across thousands of years who have discovered that Isaiah's prophecy is true, that the suffering one is real, that the wounds really do heal, that the suffering really is redemptive, that the darkness really does give way to light. They've walked through valleys so dark they thought they'd never see the sun again. They've carried burdens so heavy they thought they'd be crushed. They've faced losses so devastating they thought they'd never recover. They've experienced betrayals so deep they thought they'd never trust again. They've known guilt so overwhelming they thought they'd never be clean. And somehow, through the mystery of redemptive suffering, through the power of sacrificial pain, through the strange mathematics of sacrifice and love, they've been healed, they've been restored, they've been made whole, they've been given new life, they've been set free. Not because their circumstances changed, though sometimes they did. Not because their problems disappeared, though sometimes they did. But because they encountered someone who had suffered before them, who understood what they were going through, who could bear what they couldn't bear, and who could transform what they couldn't transform. They met the man of sorrows, and everything changed. Now here's where this becomes intensely personal, because you're reading these words, or hearing these words, for a reason. Something in your life has brought you to this moment. Some pain you're carrying, some wound you're nursing, some guilt you're hiding, some shame you're bearing, some suffering you can't escape. And you have a choice right now. You can keep carrying it alone, or you can do what millions before you have done. You can turn to the suffering one and acknowledge that you can't carry this alone. You can let them take what you've been carrying. You can let their wounds heal yours. This isn't weakness. This is wisdom. This isn't giving up. This is letting go. This isn't defeat. This is the beginning of victory. Because the battle has already been fought. The price has already been paid. The suffering has already been endured. All that's left is for you to receive what's being offered. What's being offered is transformation. A new way of seeing your pain. A new way of carrying your burdens. A new way of living with your wounds. A way of being human that doesn't deny suffering, but doesn't let suffering have the final word. The Wounded One shows us this new way. They model it perfectly. They embody it completely. And then they invite us to follow, to walk the same path, to embrace the same truth, to discover that suffering, when united with love, becomes the most powerful force in the universe. This is why Isaiah's prophecy matters. Not just because it predicts the future, though it does. Not just because it reveals God's plan, though it does. But because it gives us a pattern for living, a model for suffering, a template for transformation. It shows us that the way up is down, that the way to life is through death, that the way to healing is through the wound, that the way to victory is through surrender. And once you see this pattern, you can't unsee it. It's everywhere. It's woven into the fabric of reality. It's the deep magic that holds the universe together. It's the truth that sets you free, that suffering without love is just pain, but suffering with love is redemption. Pain without purpose is just agony, but pain with purpose is transformation. Let me tell you about the loneliness of suffering, because that's one of the things the rejected righteous understands better than anyone. When you're in real pain, deep pain, the kind that doesn't go away when the sun comes up, you discover something terrible. You're alone. Even when people are around you, even when they care about you, even when they're trying to help, you're fundamentally alone in that pain. No one else can feel what you feel. No one else can carry what you carry. And this loneliness is its own kind of suffering. It's the isolation that comes from knowing that no matter how hard you try to explain what you're going through, you can never fully convey it. The words don't exist. The language fails. The experience is too personal, too internal, too specific to your own soul. And so you stop trying. You smile when people ask how you're doing. You say you're fine. You pretend the weight isn't crushing you. The man of sorrows knew this loneliness, knew it completely. Isaiah speaks of someone despised and rejected by others, someone from whom people hid their faces, someone considered stricken by God, smitten by him, and afflicted. This is the loneliness of being misunderstood even in your suffering, of having your pain interpreted as punishment, being avoided because people don't know what to do with your grief. But here's what makes this suffering one different. They chose that loneliness. They walked into it willingly. They took on the isolation that comes with bearing guilt, with carrying shame, with suffering in ways that others can't understand or won't acknowledge. They became familiar with grief. It wasn't something that happened to them. It was something they inhabited, a landscape they walked through by choice. And in doing that, they transformed loneliness itself. Because now, when you're suffering alone, you're not actually alone. The Wounded One is there, has been there, knows exactly what it feels like to carry pain that no one else understands, knows the weight of grief that has no witnesses, knows the darkness of sorrow that can't be shared. This is one of the deepest comforts the prophecy offers. Not that your suffering will be taken away, not that you'll never be lonely again, but that in your loneliness, you're connected to someone who has suffered more deeply, more completely, more redemptively than anyone else ever has or ever will. And somehow, mysteriously, that changes everything. Because loneliness loses its ultimate power when you discover that someone has been there before you, that someone carries your suffering with you even when no one else can. Think about the moment when suffering becomes unbearable, not just painful, but unbearable. When you reach the point where you think you can't take one more second, one more breath, one more heartbeat of this agony. When you're so tired of hurting that you'd do anything to make it stop. The innocent man reached that point. Isaiah speaks of someone crushed, someone oppressed, someone afflicted. These aren't gentle words, they're violent words. They describe suffering that goes beyond what a person should have to endure. Suffering that breaks you, that destroys you. that grinds you into dust. And the suffering one didn't just experience that breaking point once, in a moment that passed. They carried it, they bore it, they sustained it. They took the full weight of human guilt, human shame, human darkness, and they held it without letting go. How? How is that possible? The answer is love. Love strong enough to bear what hate produces. Love deep enough to absorb what cruelty inflicts. Love wide enough to contain what evil generates. The rejected righteous suffered out of love. For you, for the person reading these words right now, for the specific pain you're carrying, for the particular guilt you're hiding, for the exact shame you're bearing. This makes it personal. This makes it immediate. This makes it yours. The suffering one didn't suffer in some abstract way for humanity in general. They suffered specifically, particularly, individually for you, for your transgressions, for your iniquities, for your peace, for your healing. And that changes the nature of your suffering, because now it's not just random pain happening to you for no reason. It's pain that the wounded one has already transformed. It's suffering that they've already redeemed. It's darkness that they've already conquered. You're walking a path that has been sanctified by their suffering, made holy by their wounds, transformed by their sacrifice. This doesn't make your pain less real. It doesn't make your suffering easier to bear, but it does make it meaningful. It does give it purpose. It does connect it to something larger than yourself. And here's where it gets even deeper, because the man of sorrows doesn't just suffer for you. They invite you to suffer with them, to join your pain to their pain, to unite your wounds to their wounds, to participate in the redemptive work they're doing. This is the mystery that generations of believers have discovered, that when you offer your suffering to the wounded one, when you give your pain to them, something supernatural happens. Your suffering gains a power it didn't have before. It becomes redemptive. It becomes useful. It becomes a force for healing in the world. Not because suffering itself is good, it's not. But in this broken world where pain is unavoidable, the suffering one has shown us how to transform it, how to take the very thing that was meant to destroy us and use it to heal others, how to let our wounds become sources of comfort for those who are wounded. This is what it means to follow the path Isaiah saw, not to avoid suffering, but to suffer redemptively, not to escape pain, but to transform it, to carry it the way the innocent man carried it, in silence, in love, in hope, in faith that God can take the worst things and somehow bring good out of them. Think about the people who have helped you most in your darkest moments. Chances are, they weren't people who had easy lives. They were people who had been through something, who had suffered, who had been broken, who had faced their own darkness. And somehow, instead of being destroyed by it, they were transformed by it. Those people were living the pattern of the suffering one. Whether they knew it or not, they were embodying Isaiah's truth. They were proving that redemptive suffering is real, that wounds really can heal. And you can be that person too, not by yourself, not through your own strength, but by uniting your story to the story of the rejected righteous, by joining your suffering to their suffering, by letting them take what you're carrying and transform it into something redemptive. This is the offer. This is what the prophecy has been pointing to all along, that no suffering is wasted, that no pain is meaningless, that every tear, every wound, every moment of agony can be caught up into the work of the suffering one and transformed into something eternal. But you have to make a choice. You have to decide whether you'll carry your suffering alone or whether you'll let the wounded one carry it with you. The man of sorrows is waiting, has always been waiting, will always be waiting, not with impatience but with perfect patience, not with judgment but with infinite compassion. The suffering one knows you can't do this alone, knows you need help, knows you need someone to bear what you can't bear. All you have to do is say yes. All you have to do is open your hands and release what you've been holding so tightly. All you have to do is trust that the innocent man can carry what you can't carry, can transform what you can't transform, can redeem what you can't redeem. And when you do, you'll discover something remarkable. You'll discover that you're stronger than you thought. Not because you are strong, but because they are strong in you. You'll discover that you can bear more than you thought you could. Not because the weight is lighter, but because you're not carrying it alone anymore. You'll discover that there's hope even in the darkest valley. Not because the darkness is less dark, but because the suffering one has walked through it before you and knows the way out. This is the power of Isaiah's vision. This is the promise of the rejected righteous. This is the hope that has sustained countless people through countless sufferings across countless generations. So receive it, trust it, live in it, let it change you, let it heal you, let it transform your suffering into something redemptive. Let it turn your pain into purpose. Let it make your wounds into wisdom. Let it take your story, no matter how broken, and weave it into the greater story the suffering one has been telling since the beginning of time. The story of love conquering hate, of light overcoming darkness, of life defeating death, of redemption triumphing over sin, of healing flowing from wounds, of meaning emerging from suffering, of hope rising from despair. This is your story now. This is your invitation. This is your moment. If this vision of the suffering servant found you in a place you didn't expect, if Isaiah's ancient words touched something deep inside that you thought was beyond reach, don't let this moment pass without marking it. Comment below what Isaiah 53 means to you now. And if you know someone walking through darkness right now, someone carrying suffering that seems too heavy to bear, someone who needs to know that their pain can have meaning, share this with them, not as an answer to all their questions, but as a companion for their journey, as a reminder that they're not alone, that the one who was pierced for our transgressions is suffering with them, and that on the other side of this valley there is light, there is hope, there is healing, there is life. Press like if this story moved you. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. And most importantly, let the suffering one into your pain. That's where transformation begins. That's where healing starts. That's where everything changes.